Shalom, this is Rabbi Josh Rose, and this is Shikul Da'at. This is a special edition of the podcast because I sat down and had a conversation with my father, which turns out to be about Parshat Vayechi, but doesn't begin that way, as you will see. We discussed the theme of hope and living with hope and discovering hope in difficult times. Enjoy. So I have a question for you. If one thought in the middle of the 20th century, if one thought that the world was moving towards more order, more peace, more democracy, more justice, not that we've given up on those things, but it doesn't seem like the world continued on an upward trajectory. So how do you, and that much is obvious and banal, but how does one... Are you hopeful? How does one hold on to hope during such times? Well, and is there any justification for it?
I think there's always justification for it because of human potential and dreams. I think that these, if you want to compare history, the Middle Ages are a hell of a lot worse than now. I think one of the worst things that's going on now is this very narrow, defined nationalism. And I think from what I can see, that a lot of that has happened as a result of, there are a number of reasons, but I think one of the major things involved is the struggle between the haves and the have-nots. And unfortunately, using Trump as an example, he was smart enough to play into all those frustrations that people have. And unfortunately, the same dynamic is going on in various places in the world, from what I gather. A lot of right-wing stuff going on. So, I just believe we have to keep on doing what we do and hopefully, building a hope that we have to just keep on working towards our dreams. I don't know what else I can say. The prophets in ancient Israel did it. We have to do it. And we have to build a good life for ourselves as well on top of it, regardless of all the forces outside of us.
Would you say that you are hopeful? Are you a hopeful person?
It's an interesting question to me. While I might not sound like it, I am. Part of it is the impact that prophetic literature has had on me.
Yes.
That's what I think. And just the hopefulness, look forward to, despite all the evils that are around us all the time. I think there's a real, hope there.
Right.
And I think that's part of me.
Right.
No matter how upset I get at the world that's around me.
Right.
And
yeah, that's interesting because that does actually, I think, shed light on your personality a little bit, or in your relationship to the world and to the existence of evil, because you are, I wouldn't say, as much as I love being around you and spending time with you, I don't think very many people would describe you as like a sunny personality. And you have a lot of disappointment and anger at the world, as do the prophets. But so it's interesting to say, was Isaiah hopeful? Is kind of a silly question, because the first 50 chapters of Isaiah are filled with fury, right, and disappointment and anger, or Jeremiah or whatever. But your point is, there's always underneath that, there's, I don't know if hope is even the right word, but a sense that the world has a greater order,
right,
that it has to move towards.
Right, and then it can be overcome, and then it's like there are ups and downs all the time in life, as there are in personal lives. So, in terms of the world order, like at the end of World War II, it was a rebirth of hope.
Right.
And all these wonderful organizations were set up.
Right.
And they've done wonders. They have.
Yeah.
But they've also exposed some weaknesses in terms of sort of a passivity that comes with time, with, you know, like the UN, for example, I think is a very good example of that. As time has gone on, it was doing much greater stuff before.
Right.
Now it's retreated in a lot of ways from the world, but at the same time, it's doing a great amount for the lower classes, the hungry, and the suffering. There's no question about that. On the other hand, not on the other hand, but part of the mix is yeah, I mean, I heard the other day, I was listening to something, I can't remember it, but someone said that, talking about personalities of leaders, a lot of leaders is very narcissistic.
Many leaders are?
Yeah. And when that goes, that it influences the decision-making, the structures they support over a period of time. So I think that in World War II, the end of World War II, it was really driven by hopes and dreams for a different kind of a world. And I think that all this great stuff was done, and then you get into the individuals who get into power, and it becomes irrational, and then other nations stand by and let it happen, just the way they did in World War II. Right. So you see, I don't mean to be preaching, Josh.
Are you talking about complacency, or people becoming complacent?
How do you explain our acceptance of an Assad?
Right.
I mean, it's because the nations round about are playing their own games, not caring about the realities of the ethics of the situation. And that seems to be a pattern.
Right. So human beings have a huge tolerance for evil.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do.
And sometimes I think we don't realize how powerful people are. And that's what's been wonderful about this country.
Right.
But now it's sort of submitting to a lot of crap.
Right.
On the other hand, at the same time, trying not to bore you, at the same time, for example, during this election, this midterm election, you had, I don't know, thousands of people knocking on doors.
Right. Absolutely, yeah.
Which is wonderful.
Huge increase in voter engagement.
Yeah, average people.
Right.
Not big shots, just average people.
Right.
She was just meshuga l'davarecha. She was just, well, she's always been a liberal, but you probably don't know her. But she's, was intent on this kind of stuff.
Right.
And I wanted to call her and tell her congratulations for what you did.
Right. Yeah, and also your daughter, Tanya.
Yeah.
I have friends who, in the Jewish community, who they have two teenage girls, or middle school / teenage girls, that they took to Nevada for that congressional race, and they were knocking on doors and stuff. So yeah, all kinds of activism. So, one thing that you said that was something that came up for me as you were speaking was I told you I'm watching this documentary about Vietnam by the Ken Burns documentary. Yeah. And one of the things that makes it so compelling is that he, over the course of the narration of the war and the description of what was happening, he then cuts to the present where he interviews soldiers and officials who were on the ground there. And one of them is this, I think he's a Marine. And, a lot of these guys are, it seems that none of them feel good about the war. At the time, some of them went into the war very enthusiastic, wanting to help their country. And then their comments just reveal a very deep cynicism, cynicism earned through experience. But one of them makes the point, he says, some people think that all of these people went to Vietnam, and then these soldiers went to Vietnam, and because of what they saw there, it really turned them, kind of morally compromised them and turned them like kind of dark. But he said, human beings being what they are, Vietnam was just finishing school. In other words, he was saying human beings have a proclivity towards domination and violence, and his view is pretty dark. But that just came up for me when you said, like, how is it that an Assad can come to power and we don't stop it? And I think we have while I wouldn't agree with that fellow that we are inherently the most violent of all the animals, I do think we have a great capacity to tolerate a lot of suffering and not be moved by it or not be inspired to do anything about it. But you're saying that we, just to go back to what you said we have an enormous amount of power, responsibility. So I want to read you something in the Torah portion. The reason this is all on my mind right now is that in the beginning of this week's Parsha, very famously, the Torah portion is let me just see if I can pull it up so I can read. So it begins Vayechi Yaakov be'eretz Mitzrayim sheva asra shana Vayehi yemei Yaakov shnei chayav sheva shanim v'arba'im u'mea shana. And so this Torah portion is a parsha setuma, a closed Torah portion, meaning that there's no graphic break between last week's Torah portion and this week's Torah portion. It just continues right in the middle of the paragraph. And Rashi's comment is Lama parsha zo setuma. Why is this Torah portion closed? And he's quoting, I think he's referring to Bereshit Rabbah. Why is this Torah portion setuma? Lefish kevan sheniftar Yaakov Avinu nistam'u einehem v'libam shel Yisrael. Because when Jacob died, the eyes and the hearts of Israel were closed. Mitzarat ha-shibud, on account of the suffering of the of slavery. Sheitchilu l'sha'avdam, because that's when their slavery started. Devar acher shebikesh legalot et haketz levanav v'nistam mimenu. And he then gives an alternative explanation for why it's a parsha setuma, a closed Torah portion, because he wanted to reveal the kates, the end to his children, like the ultimate destiny of the Jewish people to his children, but it was closed off from him. So the way the rabbis read the parsha, they look at the closed parsha, like the physical, the graphically closed text, and they try to derive a lesson from that. And they say that he wanted to reveal the end, the ultimate destiny of the Jewish people. So that's the second reading, but it was closed off from him. So he was sort of hoping to have this kind of prophetic insight. And so you wonder, I think that what Bereshit Rabbah is getting at is, on both of those different readings, is that there's an awareness that somehow the Jewish people are heading into an incredibly dark time for hundreds of years, right? For 400 years, they're going to be in Egypt. And the question of their hope and their ability to see past their present moment, I think, is what Bereshit Rabbah is pointing to, that somehow Jacob wanted to convey to them an understanding that their current condition wouldn't be permanent, right? That's why he says he wants his bones to be brought out of Egypt, because he knows that eventually they'll get out of there. But the fact that God didn't want it revealed, that he took that prophetic insight from him, means somehow, and this is how I'm trying to bring it back to our moment, that somehow not knowing, when we're surrounded by suffering and the darkness of the world, the nature of our cognitive and everything else, and are being located in time, so we can't see beyond it. Or the nature to be a human being is to not know what comes next, and to not know what comes next. Right? It would be easy to endure suffering if every time you encountered suffering, whether it was personal or national or whatever, if you knew that eventually the outcome was good, it would be less horrible to bear, right?
Right.
But that's not ever what happens. So right now at our moment, we see around us, whether you want to look at Syria or you want to look at the, increasingly frightening situation in Israel, or you look at our own country, you look at the backsliding of democracy everywhere around the globe, and on and on and on and on. If we knew intellectually that, this is just a temporary blip, and in another 20 years the world will be liberated and filled with blessing and good things, it would be not so challenging to endure. We're not dispiriting, but that's not the nature of it. We don't know what happens next. So
right.
How do we, to go back to your point that we have tremendous power and responsibility without knowing where things go now and knowing that things sometimes can get worse, how do we hold on to hope? What do we do with that? How do we open our own eyes and hearts?
First of all, I think we have to see ourselves as part of the process. I think the withdrawal, saying, I can't do anything about it, well, when am I going to be involved? I think that's probably one of the biggest problems that we have. And certainly in a country like ours, where so much was made possible, and we just have so many people, who don't even go and vote.
Right. Right.
That's how powerless people feel. And I think this is why we have to keep on encouraging people and groups, to engage in the world, because that's what's required to make it better. If people don't get involved, then we'll leave it up to the pigs to run it. And
And so what's the, let me ask you now, let me turn it more explicitly to a Jewish question. What is the role of Torah, and broadly speaking, and what is the role of a rabbi in that? Or how did you understand that in your work?
Well, I think that there is hopefulness in Jewish teaching. To me, there is. And that's what I think it basically is. And it deals with reality. I think that's one of the beauties of Judaism. It's not superficial, but it really, I think it really lives in the reality, and it's constantly reminding us of the dream and the responsibilities that we have. I don't know how else to say it. I think that's what, it's a very positive religion in that sense. It doesn't accept the inevitability of the evil of man and, and all of that stuff. And I think that's great about Judaism. It is. It's a very hopeful religion.
Can you think of moments, a little bit putting you on the spot, where you very consciously felt like you had to, either through a sermon or through an event that was happening at the shul or a speech or whatever, where you felt in a kind of very aware, self-conscious way, this was a moment when you had to give hope to people. You needed to deliver a sermon of hope. Like if you look back at particular historical moments or events that happened in the country or the Jewish community, can you remember a sermon or a moment when you really felt like my job is to deliver hope at this moment?
Well, I think I did that in a lot of eulogies.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I think there were many, many sermons where, I would be encouraging many times. A lot of them, a lot of my sermons went that way. By pointing to the ills, that's one way of addressing the problems.
Right.
And I think that rabbis are in a very, very unique position to help their people. Mm-hmm. Very unique. Mm-hmm. And to deal with all of the issues that you're raising. Mm-hmm. The true realities of life, which can't be overlooked. Judaism does not overlook them. Mm-hmm. It accepts, but it doesn't accept, that there's no hope. It just doesn't. Mm-hmm. At least not in my understanding or my processing of Jewish life.
Right.
And I think a rabbi has a critical responsibility in the life of the Jewish people to respond that way to life.
Yeah. Going back a minute, I like something you said, that when you begin to, I forgot how you put it, but a couple of minutes ago, when you begin to describe what's wrong, there's actually implicitly hope in that, because that's the first step towards
absolutely
making a tikkun or a repair of some.
Absolutely.
And it's interesting because in Jewish mysticism, one of the core dyads within the mystical system are these two dimensions of God. One is the on the one hand you have chesed, God's like overwhelming just bestowal of blessing and goodness and kindness and compassion and mercy, but then also sometimes God is the God of justice and consequences and limits, and but there's a relationship between those two, and ultimately the God of justice, says the Jewish mystical system, says the Kabbalah, is actually wedded to the God of mercy. The God of justice, that justice is wedded to mercy. And so that's what comes up for me when you say, when a rabbi challenges either a congregant for misbehavior or bad decision or whatever, or excoriates a public leader, on the one hand, that looks like, it can look like aggressiveness, or it can look like cruelty or insensitivity, but actually if you look at it in light of what you just said, it's actually an expression of mercy and hope, because if you don't draw boundaries and identify what's wrong, you can't move towards what's good.
Right, absolutely. I mean, there's no, if I were to the basic thing is to try and get people to, the ongoing challenge is for everybody to be engaged as much as they can.
Right.
I mean, that's what it comes down to. And a rabbi has all kinds of opportunity to push that.
Right. Yeah.
Endless to push that. What other position could one be in and do that?
Yeah, right. Right. And also because the full range, like in a particular individual, there, on the one hand, you can give sermons about political or social, cultural problems that can inspire action, but also, you meant, when I asked you about hope and how you had delivered it, you talked about eulogies. So it's also just the most personal and intimate moments. Absolutely. That whole range is part of the rabbinic what's the word? Playing field, so to speak. So yeah, it's true. It is unique in that way.
And also, the other thing that to me is wonderful about Jewish teaching is that we don't deny the realities of life. We don't deny the problems of life. We don't deny any of the conflicts in life.
Right.
And I mean, that's great. I mean, to ignore them, and talk about love all the time, to me is bullshit. Mm-hmm. It just is.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I mean, you see, I think the reason that Jews were killed is because they loved them so much.
Right. You're referring to Christian notions of love.
The simplicity of
I think I see it differently. I know what you mean. Yes, there is a certain kind of strain of American Christianity.
I'm exaggerating to make a point.
I know. But no, I hear you, and I listen. If you think about it, as we end the book of Genesis and go into the book of Shemot next week, it's through suffering and the confrontation of suffering that God actually establishes a relationship with the Jewish people, right? They call out to God because they're so miserable. So we've always, to a fault, and here too you could make a joke about it, the Jewish people believe in suffering in that sense, right? It's through a confrontation of how bad the world is and how bad things can be that we actually get a vision of something else that can be. So yeah, we don't. Not only do we not shy away from it, from the reality of life, as you're saying, that's really where that's the seed of all Torah.
That's crossing my mind now. Is the Berditchev Rebbe?
Yeah. Yes.
All the horrible things that go on.
Yeah.
And what does he end up with? Yiskadal.
Yeah. Right.
It's amazing.
Yeah. It's true.
It's just amazing.
The Kaddish, the affirmation of God's goodness and praiseworthiness and blessing in the world.
After they pour out your heart, everything horrible that goes on, boom.
Yeah, the Kaddish. Beautiful. Beautiful. I love that teaching.
I'm going to see what else.